Hi everyone, welcome to Type
Hi.
Talks. Today we have Joel and we have Tim. They are both INTPs and they're my classmates from Personality Hacker Profiler training. And they live together, so they coincidentally are two INTPs living together. How is that like, by the way?
I think it's great. I mean, it feels like it's easy to sort of mesh. I mean, we're different people, but we find it easy ways to cohabitate, you know?
Yeah, there's no like conflict really. I think we understand each other pretty well.
And I've had other roommates. I guess it's not always easy to not have issues, but it feels like with another INTP, it's pretty easy to mesh.
Oh, that's cool.
To gel.
Yeah, so INTP plus INTP roommate is recommended. I'm kidding, but it's fine.
Not a bad idea.
Yeah, not a bad idea at all. So today we'll be talking about INTP myths. And Joel, would you like to get us started on some myths that you think are associated with INTP?
Okay. Well, I was thinking about this ahead of time and just how oftentimes when we talk about myths, it's something that we think people think about us, and that's not true. And I haven't had that many issues with that, except for when it comes to people feeling that I may be cold and emotionless. That's a common thing for INTPs to confront, I suppose, is the idea that just because we have difficulty externally emoting, we may be perceived as if we don't care. And in reality, that's like, can be far from the truth. Sometimes it is we don't care, but sometimes it may be that we care. We just can't show it as easily as someone else.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's definitely like this conception that like INTPs are, well, because we're such thinkers, like we can't also feel, or because we don't, like you said, like we don't express it. It doesn't, I think especially maybe to FE people, because I've heard with FE that, because it's looking for emotions externally. If emotions aren't externalized, they're assumed to kind of not be there. But it's not always the case. Like for us with our backseat FE, we still, although we don't always have a great handle on knowing what they are or when they're influencing us or things like that, but we still, we still feel things. And I think that that's a easy misconception people find themselves having.
That's so interesting. My INTP friend once described his emotions as a roller coaster that's not really like in charge, but it happens to him.
Yeah, definitely not in charge.
Yeah, it just happens when it's going to happen. You know, that's the thing is like, I feel there's a degree to which as a young INTP, and there's that backseat FE. It's the desire to be, to be able to emote and to externally show that you care and not be able to and feel bad about it. When reality is it's like, it could be considered a strength in some ways when dealing with highly charged emotional situations, the ability to not externally, be crying or showing that you necessarily like it can be comforting to someone who wants that in someone to talk to. They want someone that's not going to break down emotionally and listen to what they say and actually care. So it's really about establishing trust with the individual, and that they know that you care, so that even if you're not showing it on the outside, they know that you care, and that can be actually a strength as a person grows older and kind of like accepts that they're not responsible for people getting the wrong idea. People think because we're not crying on the outside that we don't care. That's really not on us. That's kind of on them, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because all they'd have to do is ask, just say, sorry, you're not crying, but is it that you don't care? And we can clarify for them. But if you jump to assumptions, it's like, I can't be responsible for that. But when I was younger, I really felt very much responsible for not being able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've found it surprising because being a thinker and knowing you're a thinker, it's actually kind of easy to believe that myth of, that you don't have a good handle on feeling or a good enough handle on feeling. And I find myself consistently surprised when people actually want to like confide in me and tell me what they're feeling and want, to engage with me on that level, that I'm actually able to give that to them, like it's not a thing that I would think that I would be able to do, but apparently for certain people, it's kind of what they want, is someone who's a little bit more, takes a step back and thinks it through kind of perspective.
Yeah, totally. So if cold and emotionless is the incorrect way of putting it, then how would you put it then?
Well, I think that there's a degree to which a person can care very much on the inside. And there's a degree to which FE seems to feel that all emotions are valid. I don't have to have I don't have to have gone through something to be able to appreciate that someone else is feeling these emotions and that they're valid because they're feeling them. So there's a degree to which, on the inside of this robot exterior, I do care that people are going through emotional situations. And so it's just important for people to know that just because on the outside it doesn't seem like that, a person can care very much. It's more like a cognitive form of caring, where I'm aware that this person's going through a hard time and that's terrible, and they need someone to be there for them, or they need, whatever I can do to help, I'm willing to do that. But if it requires me to cry, I may not be able to do that. There's a lot of other ways that I could help just by being a listener, but I may not be able to help by being that, emotional person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I haven't found it in my own relationships that my non-emotiveness has been, it's more like that myth or that stereotype. It's more like a critique on what the popular view of an INTP is, more than it's like a thing that I see being a problem. Like being less emotive hasn't been an issue, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I guess another myth I'd like to ask you about is, what are like your thoughts on like Sheldon Cooper?
You're setting
Like,
me up for that. Yeah. So, yeah, that's the thing that bugs me. Like when like certain like celebrity INTPs or fictional INTPs or whatever that some people may say are INTP, like they may be, but
yeah.
that doesn't mean that they're a good like middle of the road, this is what your average INTP is kind of example. And it's like, I don't know. Yeah, there are certain ones where, there are people who are like, there are people who have no social capability and they're just extremely blunt and cringy. And yeah, a lot of them might get put in the INTP bucket,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't mean that that's what the majority of us are like. We have to take us all at an individual level.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's the difficulty with Sheldon is that, I mean, he's fictional. I suppose, there's a lot of like, when it comes to celebrities, we take guesses as to what they might be. But at least that's a real person. But when it comes to fictional characters, it seems like the stereotypes of that personality type are usually, brought to an extreme because it's funnier. It's a lot funnier when a person is an INTP that has absolutely no social skills and
Right.
who's in their head all the time. So, but I mean, there are things that I relate to with Sheldon, but he's clearly, I mean, there's also a degree to which a person could be on the spectrum, and they, there's an addition to the fact that they're an INTP, they, maybe have other things going on that make it harder to relate to as far as like just your typical INTP out there. But definitely with Sheldon, it's an extreme example. It's a stereotype of the situation.
Yeah.
I have more of an issue with Dr. House being, called an INTP than I have with Sheldon. But, it's hard to say. I don't know what people would say Dr. House is, but he's like, there's socially awkward backseat FE like Sheldon. And then there's like rude, mean supposedly backseat FE, like Dr. House is just like, unnecessarily mean person, and that doesn't resonate to me as an ITP. Like Sheldon is not. Sometimes you're trying to tell a truth, right? You're what you believe to be the truth, your TI logical statement, but it wasn't intended to hurt anyone. It's just bluntly true, and at least in your estimation, whatever. And so, but someone like Dr. House, on the other hand, is like. Doesn't seem to care whether he hurts someone else's feelings or not. It's like almost like part of the intention, it seems sometimes, but it's hard to say. So to me, they're just two extreme examples of what people think INTPs could be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, Tim, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I know people who put their Myers-Briggs type on the resume. I would never do that. I would never do that because I know that what'll happen is the person reading it won't know Myers-Briggs and they'll be, what is that? And they'll type it into Google and they're going to read all kinds of things. Like, I don't know which site they'll wind up on, but guaranteed they're going to read things that are not true about me. So no, that's definitely
So what things aren't true?
I don't know. I just a lot of the conversation out there would just kind of paint INTPs as dicks. I don't know. Like, we're not. It just depends. It depends on whose opinion you're reading, and sometimes it's even INTPs. Like, there are INTPs who are really into being INTPs. And they're like, no, that's not logical. I can't. No, that's not the INTP. You can't be a true INTP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of like with Frank James and his, he often does those like 16 personalities, doing this or doing that, and they're always very funny, but they always sort of like fall into that stereotype as well. Like, usually the ENTPs always like arguing, which I know ENTPs that aren't like that. And I feel like the INTP, he always portrays them as being very, very socially awkward, almost like robotic, really, where they have to kind of like, if they're going on a date, they have to plan out, like what normal social activities would be required, and maybe even making a list or something like that. And I think that just depends on the degree of someone's social exposure. Like, if you're used to being able to engage socially, you may not be you may not be able to be the best at it, but you're not as awkward as maybe sometimes we are portrayed.
Yeah, and there is also truth to that too, because I definitely have found myself in social situations that are more than I was prepared for, and yeah, I can be awkward. Like, I have those moments, but also not always, and Frank James, though, it's like his videos are meant to be funny.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
don't mind them. They're really funny. I love them, but at the same time, it's funny to see how the sort of a caricature of an INTP,
Sure.
Because I guess that's the funny thing is we've all probably had moments where those things were true, but they're not all the time. And, it's not, it would be unfair to characterize all of our social behavior like that. But there's definitely moments where it's like, oh yeah, I've been there. I've definitely done something like that, relatively like robotic, like when it comes to dealing with social things.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I guess my question would be for that is, in what areas have you been like that before, but then you've changed currently? Or like, in what areas have you improved from the stereotype?
Well, what I've found is that there's a tendency, perhaps, at least in my case, to get stuck in, maybe it's kind of like a looping thing, TISI, and kind of like imagining the scenario, the social scenario ahead of time and preparing for it. But there's nothing like just being out there. Like, it's sort of like, being shoved out of the nest. When you really get into extroverted intuition, when you're forced into social situations and you just have to sort of like try and roll with it, it helps you develop the ability to do so in the future. And the more you do so, it's really good for you, because you could spend your whole life preparing for things that won't actually happen, or you can just get out there and do it. And so over time, I feel like I've gotten better at just getting out and just going ahead and extroverting per se, with socially, and just rolling with it.
Yeah, I've also found that what you actually do socially has a big impact on how well that can work out for you. Like it's like if I'm in a group of people, like intuitives or people who want to just talk about random stuff, like that's much easier and much more comfortable than some other things. Like I've tried salsa dancing, super SE community, right? A lot more difficult to feel comfortable in that environment, or like, being like doing music and, being on stage and stuff like that. That might not be like that might be a super challenging thing to do. But if you go out and you do that and you're really awkward at it, well, it's probably not because you're really awkward. It's probably because you picked something that's pretty far out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like you kind of have to start with things that are a little bit easier, like socially, to mesh with the group, just to sort of like get used to doing that. But it's great to push the boundaries. Like, do something like salsa dancing is a really good thing for an INTP to do, because it pushes and challenges our own boundaries. And when you're able to do it and get out there, then it kind of builds a degree of confidence in yourself to do that, to even be able to mix socially with people of all different types.
Yeah.
And even if they are more SE, you feel more comfortable at it. But it takes time. I would definitely start with, like, it's easier to do that to just mesh with intuitives or people who we have a lot in common with.
Well, and it's also like, I think you're right. It's important to do things like that, to know that you can do things like that. But I mean, for me, like it's fun, but it's not like, obviously that hobby ended for me. So, mission accomplished, I can do it. Next thing. And hopefully the next thing is more fun, something that I want to continue to pursue.
Not to be stereotypical, but that seems like a very INTP. That's exactly what it's like. A robot saying, "I want to acquire this human skill," and you did your salsa dancing. It's like, well, I have added that to my list of talents and moving on.
But it's not like that when you're doing it. When you're doing it, it's like, oh, okay, I gotta go. I gotta do this. All right. Am I really gonna go tonight? I don't want to go. Oh my God. All right, I'm gonna do it because I know I need to do it. So I'm gonna go do it. Right. And it's like this whole thing. You gotta like drag yourself, and then in the end, it's like, am I having enough fun to justify the amount of willpower that it takes? Like.
Yeah, but it's honestly so good to do that. It's so good. Like, I feel like that, like you see that in other INTPs, like the degree of maturity is them having done things like that, push themselves. Because if you don't push yourself, it's kind of like there's no growth without discomfort, in my opinion. So like pushing yourself to be uncomfortable and realizing it wasn't nearly as bad as maybe you thought it was going to be, or maybe it wasn't great, but you still learned how to push yourself. So it's really good.
Sure.
That's true. So I guess my question for you guys is, what do INTPs do for fun? Like when you guys hang out, like.
I don't know. I'd like to think we have a lot of great intuitive based conversations. We go, personality is one aspect of it, but just talking about things that aren't strictly material, strictly empirical, like that's great. I love that, to be able to just flow and bounce ideas. It's basically kind of like I was going to say with extroverted intuition. Like sometimes as an INTP, we can think that we're doing that by doing research and getting into new and novel things, but like really collaborating with other people is so energizing. Like to be able to really be around others and bounce ideas off of each other is so good for our health, not just physical, but mental health, to be able to have those kind of conversations. So to me, that's the most fun. It's to have those kind of conversations that are just bouncing ideas off of each other.
Yeah, we can get real speculative and we can get weird. I know it was actually like yesterday we had this conversation. It was actually Jason who brought it up. So maybe it's more of a INTJ thing, but we were talking about jet engines for like, like we're debating how they work and we don't even know what we're talking about. Like I didn't, and I don't know, like just random stuff. Sometimes we can get on long tangents.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's definitely fun. And you learn, like, like with Jason, it's just like hilarious that he is entertained by watching videos about jets and how they're made and how they work and people using them and people putting up jet engine on a bicycle or, like there's a degree to which, that kind of conversation is super entertaining. There's like that sort of like INTX type conversations. And I'm not saying there's plenty of other types that could be interested in that as well, but it's just easy. It's easy to have conversations with someone who has this kind of like similar interests and who wants to go out there with it. Like I think we were also talking about, like tattoos, and Jason's talking about having like a three-dimensional tattoo coming off of, instead of just like not just that it looks 3D, but it is literally like a hologram, and there's like nanites that help build this thing or whatever. That may not be anywhere in the near future, but it's still fun to talk about.
Yeah. It's fun to speculate things that aren't exactly like made yet, that are intangible right now. So
Right.
that makes a lot of sense. And I guess the question I have for you is, do you really think SI is memory, or do you think it's also something on top of that? Or
I disagree with some people on introverted sensing, and that like there's this idea that things, this is like, I'm totally disagreeing with people, but okay, my take on it though is that things that are in your body aren't actually introverted. They're external, and like the introverted space is all memory, imagination, thoughts, feelings, anything that's like only in your head. But if it's a body thing, it's SE. So introverted sensing is, to me, it's like that internal space. And it does a lot of things. Like it collects, because it does remember experiences, like it has certain things that are comfortable to it, I guess. It's very comfort focused, maybe not focused, but there's a strong comfort aspect to it. Let's see what else. Yeah, I guess that's the gist of it. But it does collect, I guess, because SI feeds into NE. SI is like the store of all these previous experiences that NE can base its improvisation on. And it's kind of like going back into your own memory is kind of the way that you know anything to a certain extent. It's different from TI, I guess. TI knows things, but TI is more of a model of the way things fit together, whereas SI is those actual experiences that you had that wound up working their way into your model. Or maybe they didn't, but you still remember them, and then something will happen and you'll realize something, and NE will do its thing, and now you've got a new thing for your TI model.
Yeah.
That's really interesting that introverted functions are in your mind as an abstraction that you're interacting with. So it seems like SI is more of a relationship with their stored concrete experiences or stored concrete data. Like it's like an archive of the impressions they can rely on. So what's reliable but stored concretely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think so. There's a degree to which, like, you know, like every experience, you're in the now when it's happening, which seems very like extroverted sensing, like what's going on in the present. And then, but there's a degree to which your mind is working at the time to store those same things that are happening right now. And that's why, like, I was like, when it comes to like being in a class and taking notes, I feel like me taking notes and focusing on like recording what's happening takes away from the experience of what's happening right now, and being able to like to get all of the nuances of the information that's being thrown at me. And so it's not good to be that way, in my opinion, because I know that I need to take notes. Later, I usually regret not having taken notes, but I think maybe it's better to just find that awesome ISFJ friend who's also there taking notes and use their notes. That would be the best. But yeah, it's like a degree of processing power that's dedicated to remembering the situation as opposed to just experiencing the situation. And so, like, I do agree that it's definitely related to memory, in the sense that, you know, part of your mind is going towards like making sure that you can recall this later or whatever.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it has to do with like your relationship with memory. Maybe not the IQ test memory. I think maybe that's a different thing where like you store like long term, short term. That might be like a genetic thing too. But I think the person's relationship with what they remember is SI.
Mhm.
So that makes a
Yeah.
lot.
Or, you know, maybe it's less memory and the ability to remember than it is the way that you use prior experience to justify an idea or something, or it like creates the idea. It always stems from a prior experience if you have SI in your stack, or it seems that way to me. Whereas, like, if you have an NI instead of SI, you have experiences over time through SE, and they all have their impact in NI, but it sort of happens unconsciously. And then NI has insights that come out of that, whereas the insights aren't in SI, they're in NE. So SI actually just has all of that stuff that would have been SE to someone with the opposite polarity. I don't know if I'm making sense right now. Am I making sense?
That makes a lot of sense. So SI is prior experience that justifies what you see right now. So it's like going back into the archive of your mind to justify current reality, or am I misunderstanding?
Yeah,
you?
it's kind of like if I said, "Oh, that's not the right course of action. We need to be doing this." And you said, "Why?" And I'm like, "Well, because one time I did that and this thing happened. So I think that's a pattern and we should go that way." So it's always like tied back to some experience that you've had, or whatever the closest thing you've experienced that you can remember. I tend to use language like that, I guess. And I don't know that NISE kind of has that same. It still does, kind of like, it's still what NI couldn't do what it does if it didn't have a past of stuff feeding into it through SE, but it's less aware of its origin, I guess, and it's more connecty. I don't know.
Yeah. I feel like I personally like to think of it like augmented reality. You know, like people who have SI seem to view the present through the lens of the past, like comparing notes, essentially, like, how was this before? And the more you've experienced it, the more you notice things are out of place or changed or, in comparison to your past memories. Well, people with NI seem to always be saying, where is this going? Like they're looking at the present, but they're always saying like, where is this going from here? So they're like simultaneously doing both. They're watching the present, but they're comparing it to the past. And NI seems to be watching the present, looking at the future,
Yeah. It's like SI is trying to figure out like a prototype of its past experiences to kind of project it onto the current to understand how it works now or something. So it's using the past and comparing it to the present.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked about, Tim and I have talked some about just how when you sort of post-process experiences you've had in your life, you get details out of it that maybe you didn't see at the time. And it's kind of the beauty of having SI, but having it for whatever reason, like in the tertiary position, you kind of like find it later on as you're post-processing your experience and looking through it. So, I mean, it's definitely helpful to have SI and be able to go through those memories and analyze them afterward and pull those details out,
Yeah, it can be kind of a weird experience because like when you're in the moment and you're interacting with someone, like your NE is kind of in charge of that interaction to a certain extent. Like, and like I said before, with like NE, it can be an awkward experience because it kind of just flows and you don't know where it's going. So when you're interacting with someone, you kind of just say stuff. And then what happens is that interaction ends and then you go off and you start replaying it in your mind. And you're like, why did I like what? Like, you have to do all of this post processing on it to understand like what it actually means and what that was. I know that like anytime I have like a big life event, or not even that, like sometimes if I just have like a really meaningful conversation with someone, I kind of have to just go away after that and think it through and really try to understand it. I don't know if that experience is the same for NISE, or maybe there's a similar like correlating experience.
I guess like for me, when I think about that, I'm thinking about what that event really meant. So I'm like, okay, so we have this thing. What does it really mean? Like, sure, like there's that happened, but what is that 10 layers deeper? So I'm always like taking a step back, zooming out, trying to understand if this is connected to something else, and if I can use that to understand something on a wider scale. So it's almost like I need to take that moment and I need to understand how it fits in a wider scale, or my brain is indifferent to it in a certain extent.
Do you find that you review what happened as you? So let's say you have a big conversation with really important stuff in it, right? And that's over, and you're by yourself. Do you go through a review phase in your mind at that point? What would that look like?
I think I don't normally, but when I do, it's when someone's tone, like when there's some sort of emotional conveyance that I'm still trying to like understand. So if like there's an FE reason for me to kind of think about it, and I'm like, why did they like say it in that specific tone? Because I want to figure that out. So next time I go through that situation, I'll know how to deal with it. But it's almost like I need to know like if it says something about their character, or if it like says something about their being, or like just theirness, for me to go over that. But I'm not like going over it step by step. It's kind of like, I don't know, if F is like SI, does it replay the whole thing? Does it only play the specific parts that you care about? Does it
I mean, it would replay parts. Like it would replay. I feel like there's almost two phases. Like there's a phase where you're going kind of over what happened, but then there's also what my mind tends to do a lot of is imagine a new scenario. And that may be the NE coming out of the SI, where I'll imagine myself talking to that person again, or maybe not even that person, but a different person that has some stake in the topic that we were discussing. And I find myself imagining explaining it. And like I have like an imaginary dialogue with someone in my mind. And in doing that, I'm able to kind of get at the meaning and the takeaway from whatever that was. It's like, I don't know, maybe if I were more extroverted, maybe that would actually play out for real. Like maybe after this conversation, this big conversation, I go call up my friend and we have to talk about it. And in talking about it, I get some sort of clarity over what it is. But me being more introverted, maybe, it tends to happen in my mind. It tends to happen in that like introverted recharge space, where I'll go and I'll rehash all those ideas, but I'm rehashing them in a different context, like with a different person, or like maybe a different way of expressing it. Or maybe I'm imagining, okay, how can I come back and reply to this person in a way that they're going to get it or whatever. And through that imagination, that's where the meaning gets condensed and collected.
Mm-hmm.
That is so interesting. So you have one, the actual scenario, and two, your imagination where you spring off of. So I see kind of like SI is the springboard for any. So it really takes you somewhere else. And then now you're in this imaginary world where you're interacting with this imaginary world. And you're speaking to it and you're interacting and gleaning nuggets from it or something like that. So
do you ever do that?
No, I don't. That's
okay.
Specifically.
I definitely do.
Okay.
Hard relate.
All right, cool.
Yeah. So
mine is way more focused and directed. If I'm into that memory, I'm actually not creating a multiverse. I don't know, like Joel and Antonia call any the multiverse. So you're taking this concrete memory and then you're creating like this multiverse from it. But for me, I never get to that multiverse. So it's either like the reality now or understanding the reality now. But it's never about like wee to lightning, space, and beyond, to this new world.
Okay. Yeah.
If that makes sense, or maybe that didn't make sense. Let me know.
Definitely makes sense. Like I tend to agree with as AJ Dranthik calls NI convergent, right? And NE is divergent. And there's a degree to which, like NE is just like pulling stuff out of its ass, it's just like, and it's fun. It's fun to come up with ideas and just throw things out there. And NI sort of like targets in, it seems like, on something in particular. So, when I'm reviewing memories, I feel like that's my TI, my SI kind of, it's almost like looping. I'm working through the memory and trying to make it make sense, like, or just, I mean, I don't know how to say that it make it make sense, but if it was, especially if there was like some sort of issue between people where there's like a disagreement, then I'm trying to figure out why was there this disagreement and try to make it make sense. And so I'm reviewing those memories and projecting out to, like Tim said, projecting out to a future potential possible, maybe that's the NE side of it, conversation that I might have in the future with them, and how that will play out as I'm talking to that imaginary version of that person.
That is so cool. I agree with the terms convergent and divergent. Like, it's almost like NI is so aware of the convergent stream of intuition, it knows exactly when it's off. So it's like it's either targeted at the convergent stream of intuition or it is irrelevant. And like, and I'm indifferent to the irrelevance. But it's like the strong awareness when it's not fitting into that that consolidated NI understanding, if that even makes sense.
Absolutely.
So I guess, do you guys have any more myths that you'd like to talk about? I mean, like,
One other thing that I thought about was just, as we've talked about most of the cognitive functions, but talking about like TI, or introverted thinking, right? It's like, it's very easy to believe that what you believe makes sense, that it's logical. And it can be hard sometimes to differentiate between what you believe to make sense and be logical from what you believe in an ideal ethical sort of way, like in an FE sort of way, to distinguish between the two. And I found that in myself a lot. And I find that in other INTPs sometimes, is this belief, the belief that, no, this makes sense, and not being able to see that that's just your ideal, that's your ethic, that's what you believe that makes sense. It could be something as simple as like all men were created equal, like an ethic like that. And it's a beautiful ideal. And I personally choose to believe that, but I can't pretend that that is strictly based on logic. It's really more of an ethic. And so it's kind of like, it's a dangerous myth in an INTP if we believe that everything that we think is only because it's logical. And I see that sometimes in other INTPs, especially when you're young. I was definitely like that a lot when I was young, and I can't say that I'm past it completely, and I'll probably never be past it, but just realizing that makes me self-analyze and try to figure out where those lines are.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's not like a myth that other people have about INTPs. Other people aren't believing that INTPs are always right. It's a myth that INTPs sometimes have about themselves.
Yeah. Exactly.
And it's definitely a myth.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you totally on that. It's definitely true. One thing I thought of, though, I thought of a myth that people have about TI, that TI is all about just like telling the literal truth all the time, no matter what, and without consideration of anything else. And that is not the truth. TI is not the function of, like, it can tell hard truths. It holds hard truths sometimes, but it's always coupled with FE, unless someone's really not healthy. Like, it can be really hard for a TI person to actually tell the, like, there's a lot of times where I hold back stuff that I shouldn't hold back just because I have inferior FE, and my inferior FE just isn't comfortable. It's not sure about the situation. Is this person going to receive it correctly or not? And whereas if my FE were more honed, I might be able to know that, yeah, no, it's fine, I can just say that. But because it's not, I guess, like, it actually, I think you tend to learn growing up to err on the side of holding back, because you only get to be a kid saying the darndest things for so long.
I wonder if TI has that reputation because no matter what the consensus believes, like, it still has its own TI opinion. So whatever is the truth, no matter if, like, the group believes it. So it's kind of like they may see other people be swayed, but they have a line of questioning that goes a little bit deeper than most people, and they notice things that other people, or like they analyze things that other people miss. And so they hold these harsh truths that aren't actually harsh truths, but they're actually the truth, but it's hard for people to swallow because they've been conditioned to be a certain way. So when the INTP says their opinion about, like, hey, maybe this isn't correct, like, it offends people, not because the statement is offensive, but because people aren't ready for it yet, because they're attached to the beliefs that might be wrong.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I would say that TI and FI are both extremely individual functions, and they kind of operate as a check in society against, like, the public opinion sometimes. Like, whereas I would say TE and FE are very, very much make their judgments based on sort of like consensus things. Like FE obviously consensus, but TE, like, okay, this is agreed upon metrics, this is agreed upon data kind of thing. So it's still you tend to, like, it's not a silo like FI and TI are. So yeah, there I think could be some sense of that, to where like a TI person or an FI person spends a lot of time working through things for themselves and coming up with their own take on things. And that take might not be well received. It might be better than what is commonly believed. Might not be, but yeah, I would say like a TI or an FI driver are probably some of the most independent people in terms of their perspective.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you so much, guys, for coming on. You guys are very like cool, friendly INTPs, defying the stereotype of cold, because you guys are very like warm, friendly, funny, and just good people to be around. So good company. And thank you so much for coming on the show. If you guys ever have any links, I'll link them below. And thank you, listeners, for listening this long. Like, you are incredible, awesome, amazing. Like, it's been like a full, like, long hour or so. And I just appreciate you trekking along these long videos. You are seriously, you have stamina like no other person, man. So, like, props to your stamina for making it this far. And thank you for being such wonderful guests, Joel and Tim.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joyce.
And I hope you all have a safe day. Bye, guys.
Thank you. You too. Bye.